Joining me now is Delesslin George Warren. He's a consultant and artist from the Catawba Nation. Delesslin, you grew up steeped in your tribal community. Can you tell us about some of the stories you heard growing up?
Tanake, hello, thanks for having me. Yeah, one of the frustrating parts about the recent focus on the boarding school system is that for tribal communities, we've known about these boarding schools since they were happening, right? I grew up knowing about the boarding schools when reports came out about the cemeteries and burials being found on boarding school premises. I was a little shocked at the shock because we have known that these cemeteries are there. For example, the Carlisle Indian Boarding School, which was the premier boarding school in the United States, kind of the prototype for the system. There is a cemetery there, and people have gone there for years and years and years to mourn the dead, to honor them at the cemetery. So this is a moment of reckoning, I think, less for Native people and more for non-Native people to understand their own history.
Well, let's go there because this part of U.S. history glossed over in the history books in schools. I mean, you might have a passage about the Trail of Tears, but the boarding schools piece of U.S. history isn't something that's taught. You've seen the culture war that erupted over critical race theory. What do you make of these people who don't want to be reminded of some of these difficult chapters in U.S. history, and why is it important that they be there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a lot of my work is doing public education, both within my community, but also importantly outside of my community, because these histories are so hidden. On the topic of critical race theory, etc., it is a little bit hard for me to wrap my mind around opposition to discussing this history, because in the very Declaration of Independence, it uses the phrase merciless Indian savages. And so I am not sure how I'm supposed to teach the document without actually talking about this history. And for boarding schools, you're right. Most people's understanding of Native American history ends at the Trail of Tears with the false assumption that the forced removal was a one-time event, when in reality it was a decades-long policy by the United States government.
Canada has been confronting the horrors there for some time. Listening to this man in his 80s talking about 12 years in this hellhole, choking back tears, just the trauma associated with this that he's carried throughout his life. Just talk to me about the pain, which seems to be the connective tissue between Canadians who've gone through this and citizens here in the United States as well.
Absolutely. But the system, it was specifically designed around violence and trauma, and very specifically to destroy the sense of what it means to be Catawba, or to be Kiowa, or to be Cherokee or Choctaw. It was specifically a policy created in the latter years of the violent westward expansion, where military massacres, etc., would be used. And it was this attempt to shift to a more gentle colonial policy, particularly by people on the East Coast who were not directly seeing or involved in these land disputes out west. And it was massively effective. You heard one of the speakers talking about that we were targeted for our cultures, because throughout the violence, throughout the removals, our community stayed strong because of our histories, because of our family ties, because of our languages, and because of our culture. And so this trauma that this man spoke about, this is something you hear over and over and over and over again in Indian country. And it's important to know that this was not just something that happened to that generation and ended. The people who left these boarding schools after 12 years of hell, after 12 years of trauma, after 12 years of being taught that education, that being raised, that adults are supposed to treat you with violence, and then taking that lesson on into their lives and how they interact with other people.
Yeah, the legacy, a very painful one for some time to come. Delesslin, thank you so much for your insights. Really appreciate it.